Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri. This is Outside Source. Ukraine is preparing to mark its Independence Day on the 6-month anniversary of Russia's invasion. President Zelensky has repeated this warning.
We just received some information that there can be some provocations on the part of Russia. We just do not wish to have crowds of people on the street on these beautiful days.
Meanwhile, there are real fears of a catastrophe at Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, which is controlled by Russian forces. We'll hear from the head of the UN's nuclear agency and our correspondent in Kyiv. Also on the programme, Britain's intelligence agencies face accusations they tipped off the Indian authorities about a British man who was later seized and allegedly tortured. And Malaysia's former president is sent to prison for his role in one of the world's biggest financial scandals. Welcome to the programme. This time 6 months ago, Russia was preparing to launch its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, 180 days into the war, and Ukraine is once again bracing itself for more Russian aggression. On Wednesday, Ukraine marks its independence from the Soviet Union, a day usually filled with celebrations. Not this year. In the capital Kyiv, public events have been banned, and gatherings like this, the first match of Ukraine's Premier League season, are going ahead without crowds. And Ukraine's President Zelensky has this message.
We just do not wish to have crowds of people on the street on these beautiful days. These days are really great, but our neighbors are not that great. So I think that we are going to celebrate the Independence Day and our victory and the restoration of our independence. But now we have to be very careful.
Well, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse explained what's planned in Kyiv.
We're told that there are going to be some significant guests, some friends of Ukraine. We've seen President Duda of Poland visit today. I think that could well be a theme continued tomorrow, but it does come with a warning that it is dangerous for public gatherings. I think authorities here are erring on the side of caution, but it does remind me of the time in the build-up to this invasion where the West, and in today's case, the US State Department, is warning of an escalation by Russia, mainly because of the time of year. Over the past 8 years of Russian aggression, Moscow has used this time of year, used Ukraine's Independence Day to increase its operations back then in the east through separatist militants. So, yes, I think it is going to be a poignant, a sombre and a nervous few days, but for so many Ukrainians, they are used to this. We are 6 months into a war which has caused so much human loss. Tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers have lost their lives. Families have buried their children, their sons, their daughters. It's a very poignant moment with a war that is showing no signs. I mean, it's showing all the pointers lead to a war that is going to span well beyond the next 12 months, I think.
Well, staying with Ukraine, attention has turned to the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the biggest nuclear plant in Europe, which both Moscow and Kyiv accuse each other of shelling. That's triggered warnings of another Chernobyl, the world's worst ever nuclear disaster. Well, the head of the UN's nuclear agency, Rafael Grossi, spoke to the BBC and confirmed he'd be leading a team to the plant within days. Have a listen.
I will be demanding that I have opportunities to discuss with staff, with all staff present there. And we have, of course, the vast majority is the Ukrainian operators from the plant, but there are also Russian experts there. So I will be talking to everybody and trying to ascertain the situation and make the necessary recommendations. We are going to try to establish a presence there. My conviction is that having the IAEA on site will have a stabilizing effect.
Mr. Grossi says the situation at the plant has deteriorated rapidly to the point of becoming very alarming. This is why. The Soviet-built plant is on the south bank of the Dnieper River, southwest of the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, making it the most important position, or an important position at least, for Russian and Ukrainian forces who've been contesting control of the site since early in the war. The plant was shelled on August the 5th, causing several explosions near the electrical switchboard and a power shutdown. Well, the fire was put out, but the UN says repairs must be examined and evaluated. Ukraine says Russia is using the facility as a military base to stage attacks from. According to Ukraine, some 500 Russian soldiers are residing there, and 50 pieces of heavy machinery, including tanks, are stationed at the site. Well, the EU is urging Russia to immediately withdraw its forces. The UN's chief called for the same.
I remain greatly concerned about the unfolding situation in and around Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia. Common sense must prevail to avoid any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety or security of the nuclear plant. And the facility must not be used as part of any military operation. And we must tell it as it is. Any potential damage to Zaporizhzhia is suicide.
While the Kremlin hasn't agreed to withdraw any forces stationed at the plant, it has agreed to let the UN's nuclear agency inspect it. In a statement on Friday, it confirmed its readiness to provide agency inspectors with all necessary assistance. But Ukraine says Russia must first withdraw its troops. Here's a spokesman from Ukraine's defence ministry.
And we have said to the international community that Ukraine is open and Ukraine is insisting, in fact, on the international mitigation of this situation and international involvement, in particular from the International Atomic Agency. So from this perspective, we hope that the international pressure will result in Russia at least not committing anything which can result in a risk of major radioactive disaster in the middle of Europe.
So Ukraine warning of a Europe-wide nuclear disaster, but experts say that is not likely. The European Nuclear Society says because of reactor characteristics, these power plants cannot explode. So all comparisons with the Chernobyl accident are not correct at all. In the unlikely case that one or more reactors would be damaged and go into meltdown, the most impacted area would be just around the plants. Or the moderate or low potential for impact on human health will be limited to a radius of approximately 20 to 30 kilometres. Well, these are pictures live from the United Nations Security Council in New York, which is meeting to discuss the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Let's take a quick listen.
Critical situation at the plant. If such incidents continue to escalate, we could face a disaster. The United Nations continues to fully support the critical work of the International Atomic Energy Agency and its efforts to ensure the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and other nuclear facilities in Ukraine. In close contact with the IAEA, the UN has assessed that we have the logistics and security capacity in Ukraine to support any IAEA mission to the plant from Kyiv, provided Ukraine and Russia agree. We once again urge the parties to provide the IAEA mission with immediate, secure, and unfettered access to the site. Agreement is urgently needed to reestablish Zaporizhzhia as purely civilian infrastructure and to ensure the safety of the area. We must be clear that any potential damage to the plant or any other nuclear facilities in Ukraine leading to a possible nuclear incident would have catastrophic consequences, not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. Similarly, any damage leading to the plant being cut from the Ukrainian power grid would have catastrophic humanitarian implications, particularly with winter approaching. As the Secretary General has made clear, the electricity produced at the Zaporizhzhia plant belongs to Ukraine. At this moment, it is imperative that we receive the express commitment of the parties to stop any military activities around the plant and to enable its continued safe and secure operations. To paraphrase the Secretary General's blunt warning, Any potential damage to Zaporizhzhia is suicidal. Thank you, Mr. President.
So that was the Undersecretary General of the UN, Rosemary DiCarlo, giving a statement to open the emergency meeting, which the UN Security Council is holding now to discuss the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in southern Ukraine. Well, let's get more now on this story from our correspondent in Kiev, James Waterhouse.
It's hard to see where the compromise is going to be. They've long called for a demilitarization zone, for Russia to pull out completely. Moscow has long refused to do that, saying it would leave the area vulnerable to what it described as terrorist attacks from the Ukrainian side. So where is the middle ground? If inspectors are going to be allowed in, does a ceasefire follow? I think Mr. Grossi of the IAEA conceded, while it is a virtue that the UN watchdog is independent, it is not a military body, it is not a country, that's helped them get this close to access. But equally, they can only recommend, they can only report back on their findings. They don't have the capability to enforce a ceasefire, and it's very hard to mitigate for heavy shelling, which we have seen since the start of this month. This is where it gets a bit distorted, because Ukraine and Russia have long blamed each other for shelling the area. It makes less sense for Ukraine to shell its own nuclear power plant, given the nearest troops are 10 miles away across the Dnipro River, because of where the site is situated. The concern from Kyiv is that this is Russia building a false narrative as ahead of its looking to stage sham referendums, false referendums in the area. This is straight out of the Russian playbook, and it all feeds into a very concerning part of the front line.
Let's go live to New York now, back to that UN Security Council meeting to discuss what James was talking about there.
Shellings of the NPP using 150 millimeter shells for M77 howitzers, which are American-made, and 2 guided munitions were launched. As a result of that, 1 person died in Energodar, 1 further person was wounded. On the 15th of August, 30 shells were launched for 152 millimeter artillery facilities. On the 17th, 11 shells and also kamikaze unmanned aerial vehicle was launched, which is Polish-made. 3 strikes were made by loitering munitions on Energodar. On the 18th of August, in Energodar, there were 7 shellings using heavy artillery. On the 20th of August, from the Ukrainian forces' positions, once again there was shelling against the NPP using heavy artillery and American-made shell.
Миллиметрового калибра с американскими взрывателями М379. Нанесен артиллерийский удар в район спецкорпусов
Artillery strike
номер 1
against
и
the
2
specialized
и
ancillary
лабораторно-бытового
buildings 1
корпуса.
and 2 and the lab and amenities building.
В результате удара
As a result,
повреждены здания лаборатории.
the lab and amenities buildings number 2 was damaged, the hydraulics unit building was damaged, and lighting of the station was damaged. Immediately after the shelling, fire was opened against the suburbs of Energodar. On the 22nd of August, an UAV struck the lab and amenities building number 2. Furthermore, the American long-range artillery was used to shell the thermal power station in Energodar. And according to our information, 1 civilian died and 1 was wounded. I just wanted to show you now a photo of the destruction on the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a result of shellings by the Ukrainian armed forces. We have a whole slew of such photographic evidence, and we disseminated it this morning as an official document within the Security Council and the GA. The fact that the Kiev regime continues with attacks on the station is a direct consequence of criminal acquiescence on the part of its Western patrons. At the last meeting, not a single Western delegation had the courage to condemn the shelling of the station by the Ukrainian armed forces and asked the Kievan regime to stop it. Nor was the courage found in European capitals. The capitals are simply launching an appeal to Russia to stop the so-called recent activity surrounding the Zaporizhzhia NPP. We're under the impression that our colleagues exist in their own parallel reality in which the Russian military are themselves shelling the station that they are protecting and are using the American systems for that. The pinnacle of this absurd was a recent statement made by the UK MP Tobias Ellwood and member of the House of Representatives of the United States, Adam Kinzinger, when they said that the shellings of the NPP could be the reason for invoking Article 5 of NATO. At the same time, the Western mass media are using the conclusions of the U.S. Arms Control Disarmament Agency, which says that there is nothing dangerous for the people in Western Europe in the shelling of the NPP, or even in a possible accident. There will be no major disaster. The station should withstand the rocket strike, and even if it doesn't, then the tongue of radioactive contamination will not reach Western Europe. The fact that even in this scenario, at the very least, the people in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast will suffer, well, our Western colleagues, I think, traditionally chalk off to collateral damage. Well, probably this is how they express their concern about people and the human-centered security that we heard so much about during yesterday's meeting of the Council. This cynical attitude towards the people of Ukraine is one other evidence of the fact that the Western handlers of Kiev are not at all worried about that, and they stand ready to fight until the very last Ukrainian. The disaster as a result of the shelling of the NPP, so far we have been able to avoid only because there is smooth joint work between the workers of the station, fire squads, emergency people, and the Russian military, who are helping them every way they can. And this shows that there is a healthy working atmosphere at the station and no one is oppressing anyone there. Despite the false statements made by the Kiev regime and its handlers, Russia is not locating heavy weaponry at the Zaporizhzhia NPP and is not using the station for military purpose. The military of defense stand ready to provide IAA with high-resolution photos, which shows that the weaponry, all the less so heavy weaponry, is not located on the territory of the station. Mr. President, recently Ukraine had the visit of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we pinned certain hopes on his trip. We expected the UN finally will demand that Kiev stop shelling the station. But we didn't hear from the Secretary words of condemnation of what's going on, other than appeals to, I quote, that military activities should avoid the Zaporizhzhia NPP. I would like to ask Ms. DiCarlo whether the Secretary General managed to obtain from Vladimir Zelensky a promise to stop shelling the station. What is the assessment of the Secretariat of the UN that the shelling of the station by Ukraine continue in the light of the fact that IAA is seriously concerned by the situation? From day one, we have supported IAA efforts and its Director General Rafael Grossi to organize a mission to the Zaporizhzhia NPP, and we did everything we could to make sure that the experts' visit, the agency visit, took place already in June. And we agreed to the mission already by the 3rd of June. At the time, the trip did not happen through no fault of our own. Today, we hear absurd statements in foreign mass media that the foreign countries basically pushed Russia to agree to the mission. We expect that the IAA trip mission will take place in the very near future, and the agency experts will confirm the real situation at the station. We stand ready to extend maximal support possible to resolve all organizational issues. Mr. President, I would like to now, in conclusion, draw attention of the members of the Council to the tragedy in Moscow on the 20th of August. An explosion of a car took place. Inside the car was the military correspondent and politologist Daria Dugina. Our competent authorities are investigating this, and preliminary conclusions are that this monstrous crime was organized by the Ukrainian special services. It was determined who the person doing that was, and she is connected to the Azov battalion. She managed to escape to Estonia. Daria Dugina was 29. Her life was stopped at its very height. Because of his professional activity, she has been for a long time followed by Ukrainian nationalists. This is her photo on the Mirotvorets site, the infamous one that we mentioned several times, and they are boasting about her murder. As you can see, her photo is crossed, and the caption here is eliminated. We note that this crime was condemned by an official representative of the U.S. Department of State. We call on the Council and the UN leadership to condemn yet another crime by the Kiev regime. Not only are they using nuclear blackmail by shelling the NPP and holding people in Europe hostage, but they also crossed all of the lines and now physically eliminating those civilians they do not like. And in this case, we have a victim who was an independent journalist. She was killed because of her professional activity. The official representatives of the Kiev regime are openly calling for the murder of Russians. The Ukraine ambassador in Kazakhstan, Mr. Vrublevsky, stated publicly recently that the goal of Ukraine is to kill as many Russians as possible. The greater number of them are killed now, the fewer Russians other generations of the Ukrainians would have to kill. We're outraged by the fact that the Western countries not only do not condemn this, but they help Ukrainian special services to prepare saboteurs to eliminate the so-called undesirable ones. Very good example, the situation with the Ukrainian citizen, Mr. Karpenko, who was recruited by Ukrainian services in Czechia and was being prepared trained to mine and explode things in a Czech city of Český Krumlov. He was taught how to lay explosive in buildings and cars. After that, he was sent to the Donetsk People's Republic to conduct acts of terror in the building of the administration of the Volodyarsk region. Fortunately, Karpenko turned himself in. But if he had done what he was trained for, the scale of victims is frightening to imagine. In this context, we are not surprised that the authorities of Czechia are openly expressing their happiness that Daria Dugina died. The Minister of Defense of Czechia, Jana Černochová, stated that she has no pity for Daria or her father, and that, I quote, that the night of the 21st August in Russia is something that Russia will remember for a long time. And then subsequently confirmed that she stands by every single word of hers. Even if we set aside the morals that has been in our Western colleagues replaced by the Russophobia, this statement of Mr. Chernohova is an open support and propaganda of acts of terror against civilians. I would like to recall that Mr. Chermak, a Czech citizen who openly supported an act of terror in Christchurch, was sentenced to 6 years in Czechia. And we expect that the competent authorities of Czechia will be equally serious about the statement made by the Ministry of Defense of their country and will assess them accordingly. I thank you.
Well, that was the Russia envoy to the United Nations addressing the Emergency Security Council meeting, which was basically convened at the request of Russia to discuss the nuclear power plant Zaporizhzhia. Just to sum up a couple of things that was said, the accusations which have been coming from Russia already that the Ukrainians are shelling the Zaporizhzhia plant, that the Ukrainian accusations of Russian oppression within the plant are false, and accusations that Russia are using the plant for military purposes are also false. Also interesting there that Daria Dugina was mentioned. That is, of course, the daughter of the ultra-nationalist Dugin, who was killed in what the Russians are calling an attack by Ukrainian special services. Again, the Russian envoy there accusing the Ukrainians of being behind that attack. So, of course, that Security Council meeting is carrying on, and you can get more information on that on our website, as always, and across BBC News outlets. Before we go, Twitter's former security chief has reportedly accused the company of extreme egregious deficiencies that have placed personal user data and potentially US national security at risk. The whistleblower is called Peter Zatko. He's a well-known hacker, known in the security community as Mudge. He joined Twitter back in 2020, but he was fired in January. In July, he reportedly filed a complaint to US regulators about Twitter's alleged vulnerabilities. In it, he says the platform could be susceptible to foreign interference or spying and hacking. But there's more to the story. The Washington Post has obtained a copy of Mr. Zatko's complaint. In it, he accuses Twitter of lying about bots to Elon Musk. Well, Twitter is currently locked in a legal battle with Elon Musk, who is trying to end his $44 billion deal to buy the tech company. Well, there's more on that story, as always, on our website. You're watching BBC News. As always, you can go to our website. It's bbc.com/news for all the very latest. That UN security meeting is, of course, carrying on. Let's take you live there. And as I mentioned earlier, the Russian envoy has been telling the Security Council that Ukrainian accusations of Russia using the base, the nuclear reactor, as a military base are completely false. The Russian envoy also accusing the Ukrainians of shelling the base. The UN Security Council obviously has convened this emergency meeting because of worries over security at the Zaporizhzhia plant. We will, of course, bring you more on that story throughout the day here on BBC News. But from me and the team here in London, thank you for watching. Stay with the BBC.
Hello there.